This is a journey. We can take at our own pace. But those of you that can join, it's something we can challenge each other to go through this journey together. Because to me, it really is a journey, And what I loved about the emotionally healthy leaders so far, I want to hear from you guys as well. It aligns very well to what we do in Freedom, when we're challenging people to be healed, healthy, whole inside. You can't be a great, I guess, anything in life if you're still hurting on the inside. But think about being a leader if we're not emotionally whole. So I love that we're taking, I think, what we do with others in Freedom, and we're bringing it to ourselves as leaders. And we're all leaders in whatever capacity that we're in, whether it's at work, at home, at church. We could be different types of leaders and different dynamics, but I'm personally going to take this as a challenge to grow myself. The fact that y'all are on here makes me imagine that y'all are wanting to grow yourselves as well. I said tonight in the book, we would start with chapter 1 and 2. I'm taking these counseling classes. I want to, as we're all ministering to others, and we're dealing with people with so many emotional needs, and so many challenges, mental health issues these days. I wanted to make sure I'm doing the best I can, and what are the latest tools, and am I asking the right questions? And I want to be effective. That's a big thing to me. So it's good to kind of challenge ourselves. In the second chapter, it gets into the shadows. I want to make sure I don't have any shadows. One of the things that impacted me was every family is dysfunctional. And I was like, no, those teens aren't dysfunctional. It's like every family has some level of dysfunction because we're in a fallen world. We're in an imperfect world. And because of that, even though some families have it better together than others, there's always some level of dysfunction. Some are more obvious, and we see some of that in Freedom as well. But there's some level of dysfunction. And so that really challenged me. Okay, we're all have some level of dysfunction. What's my shadow? What am I? And I was just telling Laura, after reading the second chapter, I was like, man, I've really never been into genealogy, but I'm going to kind of look back, a couple of generations and kind of see where some of that dysfunction has trickled down and how it impacted. Because we don't always have to become like what our parents were like, but we're influenced and impacted by it. And in some cases, like with my dad, I became the opposite. We see what we don't like, so we compensate for that, or we say, I don't want to be a parent like that. I want to be like this. So, we can choose one side or the other, but it all has implications in our lives. So that's what's really impacted me so far as we launch being a healthy leader, how well this fits with what we're doing in Freedom. And it's great that as leaders, we need to be healthy. It's what we did in internship. We always made sure everybody was healthy first, because we didn't want unhealthy leaders leading in the church. We could teach kind of the decision making, the delegation, all those things we do as leaders. But if you don't have your heart right, you're going to be doing those things and could harm people. So we want to be whole on the inside. So out of that flows healthy leadership. So I love the fact that he starts with the inside and then moves to talking about healthy leadership on the outside. And that's really what we're going to walk through. I want to first hear from those of you that may have read the first 2 chapters before I share anything, kind of what stood out to you, what impacted you, or even what are your expectations of why you're even joining and want to learn more about in this time we have together each month. The Emotionally Healthy Leader, and it's by a Pastor Scazzero. He's a pastor over a large church, and just, I feel like, did a really good job as I've kind of dived into this book, addressing something that's pretty deep and being very vulnerable because he's still pastoring that church. And so to me, sharing your faults, sharing your struggles, and you're still pastor of that church, that's pretty risky to me. That's like edgy. He put himself out there. To me, it's a sign of a good leader when you can ask for feedback. Sometimes we don't feel comfortable asking for feedback because we don't want the answer. And that's the leader we don't want to be, is a leader that, and if you are afraid to get feedback, that's because I've been there earlier in my career. Now I'm like, give me the feedback. I want to hear it. Patty's like that too. She was always like, how can I do better? So it's good to get to a place that, even though it may hurt, and then you also have to evaluate the feedback and say, okay, is this person, sometimes people will give you feedback and you're like, that doesn't sound right. So you also want to discern the feedback, and then also check with other people, make sure, do I really act like this? And it's a really good way as we go through this. So I want you to know this: you have permission to give me feedback, whether in the group or privately, because I want to know how I can do better as well, and are there any things you see that are unhealthy or I could do better, or things like that. One thing I did recently, because I've had a lot of pain, I'm going on almost a year with my sciatic nerve hurting. And so I've been limping since December, been hurting for a while, and it's no fun being in chronic pain. That sciatic nerve, I wouldn't wish that on anybody. And so I asked Vanessa, y'all know Vanessa, she's my assistant, and she's amazing. And I asked her, I said, look, I've been under a lot of pain. Have you noticed any change in my behavior? Am I reacting to things well? Give me some feedback. And she said, you wouldn't even know you were in pain. And I'm glad I asked. I kind of felt like I hadn't been reacting any differently. But my dad, who had knee problems, and I don't want to value how bad he was in pain. He finally got knee surgery when he was 55. I told his grandkids, my kids, that that's not the same person I grew up with. He was a different person. I wish he had done it way earlier. He was an angry man. And so I kind of knew like the impact pain can have on you and how you might. So I am conscious of it, and I try to be aware of that, and I don't want to act out of that. And I want to be spiritually mature enough that regardless of what I'm going through and what situation I'm in, I'm grounded, that I'm going to react the right way. Because to me, yeah, pain, it's a real thing, but I don't want my behavior to reflect it, if you know what I mean. I want to get to a place that regardless of what's going on around me, and we could be rocked by the waves of the world, but if we're on that firm foundation of Jesus, and the more we become like Jesus, the more we should reflect his character, so that even when the storms of life come, we should be able to react in a better way. And I've seen some people recently that some storms came and they kind of cussed and did some things. Well, the good thing is when hardships come, I don't cuss, and you don't have to do it. You don't have to react in a negative way. And that's where we want to get to. That's the goal. So in the goal of all this, being a healthy leader is getting to a place where we deal with all those internal issues, that we become more like Jesus and we react differently. We don't react in anger. We don't get jealous and undermine somebody. We can talk through those different things, but let me open it up. And
learning. I definitely want to be a better husband, a better son, a better friend, and obviously a better leader, overall a better leader. Not only the first two chapters, but the introduction. You touched on it. It definitely has made me aware. If this is just the first two chapters, I can't imagine what we're looking forward to on the other ones. I just want to grow. I want to know if there are those deficits, and be held accountable, and just grow spiritually and be a better leader and mature leader.
Awesome. Good goal. Cynthia's looking for the unmute button. Patty's got it first. She won.
Sorry.
Go, Patty.
Sorry, Cynthia. Honestly, I mean, I love reading this now, and it's funny because, get to now work in ministry, and it's a blessing to do that, but you get to see a lot of ins and outs of what happens in ministry, and behind the scenes. And so for me, getting to read some of this, it was like, oh, wow, like it's good. I think what I was seeing, it's in chapter 1, the idea of, making sure that you're not prioritizing ministry over your personal life, right? And it's funny because I remember being an internship, and I think I was in such a place where I was just so on fire for God and wanting to do things for God. And so, every event, like I was always at the church, I was always volunteering. If someone needed something, I was like, yes, I'll come help, I'll come do this and that. And it's so funny because I remember those days and just being so on fire, and it was great. But as you're going through your life, realizing that that's not always healthy, to always say yes and to always be available, because then when you're spending too much time doing things, and as great as they are, doing things for God and not prioritizing the other areas of your life, you'll start to see, certain things that aren't falling into place. Like for me, as an example, I didn't really spend as much time at home with my family. And, it's funny because when I started working at the church, I started working under Gladys with Life Group Ministry, and she's really awesome. And she's always asking me, Patty, like, how are you prioritizing your personal life? And it's funny because I was like, oh yeah, it's fine, totally fine, it's great. But then, when I really kind of dug deep into that question, I was realizing that I was spending so much time doing things that I wasn't really, prioritizing my family. I wasn't really prioritizing my personal life at home, or any personal goals that I had, outside of the church. And so that was something that was really big for me this year. And it's great because, I'm looking through the chapter, and I, seeing some of these things, I'm like, oh yeah, like I was there. Like I get that. I feel that. And I was like, wow, like, it's crazy how now, after going through that, and, being on staff now, but, again, having a leader that's so awesome, who's always checking in on me. And, I give her that authority to do that, to check in, and to call me out whenever maybe Patty is saying yes too often, or, if I ever find myself in a situation, and I might be overextending myself, to give her that kind of authority to say, Patty, you're overdoing it a bit, kind of speaking on my behalf sometimes, and even saying no on my behalf sometimes, because there's days when I'm a very yes person. I have a yes attitude. And so, sometimes, I've given her the authority for her to say no on my behalf, if other ministries are needing help or assistance, and being okay with that. Because at first I wasn't, I think because I was so used to just being a yes person, that whenever it was a no, it almost felt like my skin kind of crawled a little bit. I was like, oh no. I'm like, I want to say yes, but I know it's healthy to say no, and that's okay, because I've been able to spend time with my family, to spend quality time, and, do things with my family that I didn't get the chance to really do beforehand, because I was just always so busy. And, I started to realize that it's good to do things for God. That's not bad. But sometimes God is calling you into areas that may not always be ministry, right? They may not look like the quote unquote ministry, right? Being at the church, or being at an event. Sometimes it means being at home and being the ministry to your own family. Sometimes that means, if you're in the grocery store, ministering to the person that's next to you, and not letting those areas, be affected by having so much focus being in a quote unquote ministry setting, if that makes sense.
No, that's great.
I think this is awesome, because it's just a confirmation of things that, I've been kind of walking through the last 2 years, and being able to say, Patty, it is okay. Like, you do not always have to be at the church to be doing things for God. You don't always have to, be a Martha, because that's kind of what I felt like a lot of the time. I felt like a Martha, and it's funny because God always brings it up with me, every so often when I start to go towards the Martha mentality, and he's like, Patty, I just want you to sit here. Like, I don't want you to go do something for me. I just want you to sit here with me.
Wow.
And just be here, and even if it means just sitting in the quiet, even if it means just being on the floor for an hour in his presence, and that's more than enough. Yeah, and it's funny because we learned a lot of this during internship. I just don't think it sunk in as much during internship. I think it took God having to shake me a little bit to be like, Patty, okay, like we need to get it together now.
Well, and I think, a lot of us know these things. Like, I was kind of challenged with the part on sabbatical. And because now, I've been doing some things that are great ministry, but have taken up Laura and my Saturdays. It's only for a season, I kept telling myself. But Saturdays were a day that, when church had something, I do that. But usually it's a day where Laura and I take it easy. We kind of take a sabbatical, and we're good about our devotional time every day. We got a rhythm on that, but kind of this whole having that refresh time, taking a day. And I know a few of you, Kendra, that may be challenged with that as well. Not to call anybody out, but I know that we're looking at the people on this call, we're get it done people, so I think as we go through this, we can challenge each other and be challenged ourselves. But, there were things we taught in internship. There are things that this book teaches. There's things that Pastor Joel says. And sometimes it just has to, you hear it maybe from the right person, you hear it at the right time, but for me, this book is at the right time. And it sounds like it's the right time for you as well. And we may all be challenged by different things, and that's okay. But it's, what do you need? Where do you need to grow? And let's just be honest with ourselves about that. And that family time, he really harps on that, the balance of, not putting ministry over your family and those kind of things. And, we have to challenge ourselves, because Jesus said the poor will always have among us. We're always going to have ministry to do. So that whole thing around the no, Patty, is a real deal. It's like learning to set the boundaries. I always say you can't help everyone. I can help someone, but Laura and I, especially since taking the girls in and really that being, a really challenging time for us, we really pray and think about decisions now like that. It's like, did we pray enough about that? It's like, I want to do the God things, and sometimes the good things can be the enemy of great. And so evaluating all that.
I read the first 2 chapters, and what came across is difficulties that I've been having for a while. Okay. And one of the things that doesn't allow me to move forward was fear. Fear, okay, which is actually, and I'm learning it because my husband and I, as we do our devotions, we're learning, not to be there, not to fear, not to be in that position, where, what did I learn today? Which is false evidence appearing real. False evidence appearing real. Fear, okay? Yeah. And many a times the enemy will come and put things in my head. So of course I put things in the back burner, and I say, why am I doing this? I could move forward. So the Lord, through this, is showing me to dig deep and pull out all those things that's been holding me back from doing the things that God had already put in my heart. God put things in my heart that I could help other people. And I would like to open that up to the people. And not only that, God gave me a heart of so much compassion towards people that I want them to be free. So because I want them to be free, I want to also not believe all false lies. I don't believe false lies. It's enough is enough. So my husband and I, we've been studying this. And what I got, don't believe all that nonsense that the enemy comes across your mind. God has given you a mind that is sound and clear. That's one thing. And another thing is that, because he hasn't given you the spirit of fear, the spirit of love, power, and a sound mind. One of the things that I've carried myself with is with a lot of love. I love people. I love to, like for instance, greeting people while I'm in the choir. I'm with the STM. So, I just love encouraging people. And my family, I love encouraging my family. My husband does the same thing. He loves encouraging. He's a great encourager. I mean, if it wasn't because of my husband, I wouldn't have ever known that I could even lead. Him and Jesus have helped me move a little forward to where I am right now. That I can lead. I can make somebody else come out of their fears or even their anger, or digging deep to let all those things that's been holding them back from being all of what God wants them to be.
Amen.
Well, right now, and I did mention that in another meeting, that I'm going fast forward. I'm going fast forward. I got a lot to do. Okay, being 68 years old, and I'll be 69 in a few weeks. Being 68 years old, I'm moving pretty fast because I want to get to the point that God could use me in those areas that he wants to use me. And like I said, my areas is love and compassion and encouragement, and also speak about the things that I've been through and the things that God is still bringing out in me. Another thing is my marriage, my oneness with my husband is extremely important. And I want to make sure 35 years of marriage and going strong, praise God, and growing in that. I want to make sure that we continue to grow and grow together. So I'm trying to get my husband into the ministry.
No, that's great.
Pray for him. But I want to get to that point where God can use me all the time. I don't want to leave here without doing the things that God had put in my heart.
Amen.
Okay.
Well,
I want to go digging deep. Okay.
Yeah.
And the people that I minister to do the same.
Amen. One thing I've really recognized lately is around age. Look at you just striving for it. I watched as my dad counted the days to retirement and then was miserable in retirement. It's really about having a purpose. And Friday night, we honored Teresa Kraft. It was her birthday and she was 77 years old and she just started Bible school. And in 2 years, when she finishes, she's going to Colorado. I think it's Andrew Womack or somebody like that's ministry. And she's doing an internship up there. And I'm like, man, to be 77 years old and just going strong and starting ministry and doing that Bible school and everything, I'm just really impressed. I'm like, when I see people, as they get older, passionate, having purpose, you're going to live longer for one, but it's admirable because I can tell you this, so far in my 50s, getting older isn't for the weak. But when I see 70-year-olds or in your late 60s, this kind of thing, just striving and accomplishing things. So much of it is we never stop learning, and it doesn't matter what age you are, if you're young or old, it's about being an effective leader. And that's what we want to do in this. But Cynthia, what were you going to share?
A year ago, first part of August, I spent a year becoming a Christian biblical counselor, certified. And so the thing that I learned there, because it wasn't your average counseling, classes. And the thing that they teach you that they really grounded on is you cannot counsel anybody else until you can counsel yourself. I am still freshly filleted from that. So, but I've been here at Lakewood for 10 years now. But before that, I spent 23 years in a previous ministry. And for 18 years of that, I was in leadership, like big time leadership. But, the thing that I think back about then is they didn't teach you how to be leaders. There was no help. There was no leadership labs. There was no, what we had was a lot of working out of fellowship, in the spirit of, what is that scripture that says, if you have aught against your brother, go, and work it out. That was like we were being put in the blender. So I thought about that when that came across me, when you sent that out about that. I thought, I kind of liken it to the same thing as with counseling, in that, you can't be a good leader until you learn how to lead yourself. And so that's kind of one of the things that we talked about early on I don't even know if it was even in the first chapter. It might have actually been in the foreword or something. I can't remember, where I read it exactly, but it's pretty much basically that, that you cannot effectively lead somebody no more than you can effectively counsel somebody until you can counsel your own self, your own life, and until you can lead your own life. And it was talking about that early on. And so that is, I'm just hoping to get, well, I'm not hoping, I'm just excited to see what comes from that, and what road and avenues that this book takes, that this guy takes to bring all that about.
And in that second chapter, he also addresses that you can't see your shadows if you have your shadows. In fact, you might overlook somebody else's or not recognize it or notice it because we haven't dealt with our own shadows. So one of the things we want to do, I think, as we journey through this is to focus on ourselves. And I know it's hard to do sometimes, but even as we think about and dig into this, let's really reflect. I'm willing to ask myself some hard questions, really look at myself, look at my family, look at the things that have influenced or impacted. Because like I said at the beginning, I've never really thought about the impact my family has had on some of the decisions I make, or even how I feel. I don't struggle with a lot of different issues, but I do struggle sometimes with insecurity. And so addressing that and being willing to be open and addressing that. And each of us probably have different struggles, but being willing. But Carlos, you're so good with your emojis.
Pastor, I just wanted to comment on Stephanie's. She wrote something on the chat, and she said she wanted to share that she's ready to grow and always find myself in leadership when I do not see myself as a leader.
It's great.
So she shared that on the chat.
I decided to come because I'm always self-checking. I've been in a season where life has happened a lot, like many of us, right? And I found myself, like Patty, had to take a step back and stop being a Martha. And it's okay to sit at Jesus' feet, take care of myself as I'm ministering and taking care of my family. I've even had to learn there's boundaries with even trying to minister to my family. Sometimes it's just taking that step back and sitting at the feet of Jesus and healing and just receiving from him. So I'm really big on intrapersonal intelligence. So I always look inside. So I'm excited to read the book because you mentioned that he starts with the inside, because I always look at myself. I want to grow and learn, of course. I still could do a better job in saying no, but I'm getting better. I sense a change in season, because we're always leading, right? We're leading at home. I'm leading in my profession, and I'm leading in ministry. I'm sensing that change. And so when I sense a change, I also just start preparing myself, because I've had to take a step back and leading in the ministry and just doing several things that I was doing. But I'm sensing that, hey, things are, getting better. We should go through the storm, right? And we're go through different seasons. And so I sense a change in season. So I just want to do that self-check to make sure that I'm sound and ready before starting to say yes to this, or committing to this, or committing to that. I just had a conversation with Derek. Derek is signing up for some more ministry, but I just talked with him about that. I said, these are big commitments. Let's pray about the one that you want to commit to. Pray that you want to serve, and you want to serve many different places, but really, truly, let's dig deep. I love that, dig deep. I wrote that down, and see what God is calling? I just told him that. What is God really putting in your heart and calling you to do? I don't believe that it's here, 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 here. He doesn't do that to us.
And, I love Derek's passion in his heart. And especially, with what he's been through, what you guys have been through. And I see him just continue to progress and his energy and everything else. So I really admire that. But it's almost like a new believer. And so when I have a new volunteer or a new guy gets involved with freedom or maximize manhood, and he's all excited and gung-ho, the tendency is to volunteer for everything. And so I always kind of challenge them, because I've seen too many negative things come through that to, let's start with one thing and do it really great. Or let's, like you're saying, pray about, God, what do you really want to, because he's got a servant's heart. He's going to serve well everywhere. But where do you really want me to serve? So I think it's a great question to ask, because what we don't want is for the balance to get out of balance. Your marriage is important, junior is important, and ministry is important and all these things. So no, that's a great thing to do. And it's something that we talk about and he talks about in the book as well. And we'll be kind of journeying through that together. Do your best to read the chapters. And that way we can have more discussion. Right before he gets into chapter 1, there's how to read this book. And he says the chapters in this book are gathered into 2 parts. One focused on the inner life and one focuses on the outer life. We're going to do facing one's shadow, leading out in marriage or singleness, slowing down for loving union, and practicing Sabbath delight. And already these kind of topics on the inside, I already shared the Sabbath thing has challenged me. Doing our devotional time, slowing down, is really hard sometimes because we're achievers. Leaders are achievers. You didn't become a leader because you're a slacker. You get things done. But we want to make sure, are we leading out of the overflow like we've been talking about at the church? And that's an important part of that. And then in part 2, we'll build on a foundation of an emotionally healthy inner life, exploring 4 core outer life tasks we routinely deal with in the course of leadership. Things like planning and decision-making, culture, team building and power, and wise boundaries. I think we can all use that. And endings and new beginnings. That's a good topic as well. I think that's kind of, Kendra, what you were mentioning. So those will all be great topics for us to journey. But that's how he's kind of broken the book down. He starts off in chapter 1 talking about an emotionally unhealthy leader. So he addresses that up front. And I think we've all experienced that. We don't have to call anybody out by name, but he says, I like this word deficit. Because, I don't like when my banking account is in a deficit. So we want to be leaders with, a cash flow. We want to have more than. So these emotional deficits, he says, unhealthy leaders lack, for example, awareness of their feelings, their weaknesses and limits, how their past impacts their present, and how others experience them. Sometimes we don't think about the implications or impact of how what we do impacts somebody else. And that's when we're kind of blind to those things, how we're impacting others. And that to me is definitely an unhealthy or ineffective leader. They also lack the capacity and skill to enter deeply into feelings and perspectives of others. They carry these immaturities with them into their teams and everything that they do. Pretty impactful. And I would imagine, as you would think, the healthy leader would do the opposite of that. They'd be good at kind of knowing how they're impacting others with their behaviors. But anybody want to share? You don't have to say them by name, especially if it's me, maybe an unhealthy leader you've worked with, and how did they behave? What did that look like?
I think I'll say some characteristics of, and it's not you, Pastor John.
Well, thanks for that.
I just want to clear that up, okay, before I even say anything.
They might start picturing me.
I would have to say some things that I had experienced in the past would be someone who I think was untrusting, or not in a sense of like doesn't trust that you're able to do what you can do, if that makes sense. Like someone that micromanages and, it wants everything done their way and doesn't leave room for you to step up and to, you know, own what you're being given, right? Because for me, it felt like I wasn't trustworthy. That's what it felt like for me. It's like, oh, she or he doesn't trust me to do this and to do it, to do a good job, and to, you know, put my everything into it, and to feel like I own what I'm doing, you know? And so I think for me, that was definitely something that, you know, made me doubt a lot in some of my capabilities. And, you know, what I love about Pastor John, he's opposite of that. He's very much, you own it, you know, be creative, and you know, do what you're gonna do. And you know, obviously, like, he'll come in and he'll ask how everything's going, but you know, but I think what's great is he's allowed me, you know, with what we're doing with Freedom Youth, to be able to take it to a different level, and to be creative, and to bring in new elements. And you know, now, you know, we have kids that are coming in from the youth service, and that absolutely love it. Like, they're so excited to come in and to, you know, do this. And you know, even in the way that it's different, it's a different type of atmosphere from what youth is, because youth is very loud, and you know, you have 100+ kids there, and to come into the setting that we have cultivated, you know, and created with, you know, kind of being, it's more grounded, and it's more, you know, sitting and thinking and talking and having conversations. And you know, just again, just allowing for us to cultivate, you know, these environments for these students has been really awesome. And so you know, thank you, Pastor John, for believing in me in that sense, because it allowed me to believe in myself, you know. And so being in an atmosphere where I could do that has really helped shift me from thinking, oh, Patty can't do this, you know. And I think a lot of that came from the Patty was not enough, you know, mentality that I grew up with. And so having someone believe in me in that way has helped me grow as a leader and as a person. So
yeah, I love that. And you think about the unhealthy leader, you know, hopefully that makes me some form of healthy leader. But it's hard to give up control. And so what an unhealthy person will do, and there's usually a deeper question to that. Why are you afraid to give up control? And that's what I want us to think about as we're going through this. Let's always ask that deeper why question. It's, you know, why am I afraid to give up control? Is it because they might do it better than me, and I'm afraid, you know, that they'll take my place? So that's kind of a fear-based. Is it because I'm afraid they won't do it better and then I'll look bad to others? You know, so really a great question around those things. If you're challenged, in this case, like what Patty's sharing, to delegate or empower or that kind of thing, why are you challenged? Is there something from your past? Is there some fear you're having around that? And it doesn't have to be, that was just one example, but it could be something else. But I want us to challenge ourselves with those questions. Why am I reacting that way? That's a great question in that. I think, Carlos, you had your hand up, but you took it down.
I also wanted to add to that. One of my shadows was I wasn't good enough. And I became a perfectionist, and I had to learn how to delegate and let go, and trust the process, knowing that God's in control, and just letting go. So those were one of my shadows.
No, I appreciate you being open about that. And that's what we want to do, is personally identify, you know, what's our shadows and how do we address it and deal with it. And I'm still kind of questioning myself about those things. He mentions in here 4 characteristics of the emotionally unhealthy leader. So one is, I'm not going to get into the detail, you can read about it, but one is they have low self-esteem. That makes sense. So it's hard to be an effective leader if you have low self-esteem, if you don't believe in yourself, because then you're going to lead out of that. He really talks about making sure we're not blind to our emotional impact we have on others. We've already talked about that. Even the feedback, we talked about that earlier, being open to feedback. We've done strengths finders and different things to try and know ourselves better. So the good thing about the assessments, Kendra, there's assessments in the book, really help us kind of look at and ask ourselves about those things. So you guys can dig into that. They prioritize ministry over marriage or singleness, but you can't prioritize marriage over, and you mentioned family. We can't prioritize ministry over our marriage or even our singleness and what we do and balancing those things out. They do more activity for God than their relationship with God can sustain. So it's easy to stay busy. It's one of the reasons I used to take, when I was looking at a guy to be a ministry leader, I would usually take him on a mission trip with me to Belize or something like that, because it's easy to fake it at the church because we're doing the same activities every week. It's easy for Carlos to smile at people and greet them and be nice, and they're coming in and out of Lakewood. But if you go on a mission trip, everything doesn't go as planned. It's not routine. There's usually some hiccups, some changes. I like to see the fruit. I call them fruit tests. How do people deal with things when they don't go well? It's a great leadership test as well. It's one of the reasons we always ask, how's your devotional time? Now, if I see a guy and he's like really not doing well, I already know the answer. I'll ask him, how's your devotional time? He's like, well, I haven't really had time lately. You already know the answer. We can't become too busy with activity that we're not spending time with God, because we always pay a price for that. And I think Lakewood Church is really good around this, whether it's from Pastor Joel, Pastor Craig, me, it kind of cascades down. We really prioritize that. But I often find that, easier said than done. We still have to challenge ourselves with the discipline of doing that. And sometimes, it's hard. I start thinking about things. It's hard to be quiet. It's hard to sit still. It's hard to, do those things. So we still have to, but that's one of the things he talks about in here, is doing more activity than having that relationship with God. And we want to do it out of the overflow. So I'm glad we're focusing on that. And he says the lack of a work Sabbath rhythm, that part really challenged me, as I mentioned, because I've got a rhythm. I feel healthy, but I'm not really taking a day. And I owe Laura a vacation, so I've got to do that, sometime. And we kind of right now, with what's going on with my health and my sciatic nerve, I'm having to wait till the end of September for the neurosurgeon to meet with them to see what's going on. So we're kind of postponing the sabbatical or those kind of things. But we have to rhythm those things in. We have to think about that sabbatical time, because we can't just work all the time, because it's going to impact our overflow. And then he gave us, how healthy is your leadership? I know how much Kendra loves assessment, so I'll post that after this on the leader private page. And then he talks about 4 unhealthy or unspoken commandments of church leadership. And he says those unspoken rules about what is okay and not okay to say. And I think we have these in our families as well. It's those things that you couldn't really talk about, or people did, or that's just Uncle Joe. Cynthia, I'm going through that, becoming a certified Christian counselor as well. And one of the things that, they talked about with this whole dysfunctional family thing is there's usually someone they go through. We never go directly to somebody. And I really thought about that. I'm so fascinated. I was able to identify that in my family. There's someone in a dysfunctional family they usually go to, but they never go directly to, and they're kind of the traffic cop in the conversations. And it is dysfunctional. And I've noticed sometimes we do that in ministry. We don't go directly to the person. We go to somebody else. And the healthy thing to do is go to the person and address it. It's a form to me of murmuring and complaining when we don't go to the person. And I know why we do it. It's hard to address something directly with somebody and go to them. It's a whole lot easier to go to somebody who's going to agree with you, who you can talk about, and then maybe they go to them. But what it does is stir up this dysfunction. So unhealthy commandment number 1 is, it's not a success unless it's bigger and better. We focus so much in the world about, it's got to be big, it's got to be successful. It's about the performance. And one thing I've never bugged Patty about is the numbers coming to Freedom Youth. If we're impacting junior, if we're impacting one person, then it's great. Now it's great now that I talked to Pastor Devontae, yesterday, and he's all excited about promoting it more and you promoting it more, and it just continuing to grow, because I want it to be effective. It's not about having 200 people there, but I don't want to waste your time, Patty. And so I love that we have 20 people right now. I'd love to have 30, 40, 50, because what's the reality of today? We have kids in society more than ever dealing with suicidal ideation, dealing with cutting and emotional issues and depression and everything else. There's kids that need what you offer, Patty. And so that's why I want to do that. So it's not about the numbers. It's not about bigger and better, but it's really about, are we doing what God called us to do? And so he addresses an unhealthy commandment is just focused on the numbers. And we still want to be effective, but it can be unhealthy when we just focus on the numbers. Carlos.
Yeah, so to that, Pastor, the author, the pastor of the book says it's not your role, it's your soul. It's not just your gifts, it's your character.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah, and I also like where he puts in here, since you kind of keyed me in, where Jesus affirms their activity for kingdom building, but he also reminds them of something more important. Do not rejoice that the spirits submit to you, but rejoice that your names are written in heaven. In other words, he wants us to remember that their joy comes from their relationship with God, not their achievements for him. And so just kind of keeping that perspective, that's great. Unhealthy commandment number 2 is what you do is more important than who you are. And our pastor reaffirms this all the time, that you're good. You're a masterpiece. He talked about it today, that we're good, before we even do anything. Jeremiah, he knew him and approved of him. He approved of Jesus before he started his ministry. He approves of Patty, of Anna, of Cynthia, of Kendra, of Carlos, even before you do anything. When you wake up, you're already approved. And I think that gets back to our self-esteem. When you know who you are and you're good with that, your leadership flows out of that. The challenge as a leader is not having your identity in what you do, but that you're already a masterpiece. You're already approved. You're a child of God. I think you guys get that, but it's helping the people that are around us in leadership as well get that as well. But it's also challenging ourselves to not make it about what we do, because it's easy to get there, to where we're just working it all the time, or, serving all the time, but we lose that relationship with God. And then he talks about unhealthy commandment 3, superficial spirituality is okay. Oh, I love this. I assume that everyone who attended church and listened to biblical teaching in our church and others would experience transformation. So I love that he addresses assumption, because that's a big thing to me. We can't assume that people are growing just because we see them at church. We can't assume that people are being transformed just because they're attending something or that kind of thing. Like I said earlier, the fruit will tell. I can tell. And when somebody goes through something hard, that's when you really see what their fruit is like. That's that fruit test. But I always say assumption is not what we want. We want to ask questions and we want to find out. And I love that he addressed that. He says, now I don't assume anything, instead I ask. And so I think that's a great little nugget I pulled from that. We really need to not assume that people, even under us, that we're discipling, we don't want to assume they're growing just because they keep showing up. We want to ask them questions and really get to some of these root causes and that kind of thing. So I thought that was good. He says the problem is that in most settings, as long as leaders are doing their jobs, volunteer or paid, everyone is pleased. And I think about it, that's pretty true. As long as you're showing up to your usher job, you're at your post, you're greeting, as long as Patty's Friday night showing up there or has it covered, we assume they're growing. We assume these things. but we can't just assume. I thought that was pretty powerful. And the fourth one was unhealthy commandment number 4. Don't rock the boat as long as the work gets done. So we don't always address when we see some things that may be out of order. I might even ask you, as we go through this journey together, and hopefully you'll be honest with me, have you seen things in our church that are unhealthy or dysfunctional, or maybe there's a better way to do it and we're just not addressing it? I call it the elephant in the room. It's like, what is that thing that, could be done better, could be done differently, or we're not addressing it? I think it's healthy just to talk about it. And whether we do something about it or not, I want us to get to a point where this whole thing around don't rock the boat as long as work gets done, it should be okay to ask questions. I feel like sometimes it's not. And so let's address it. Let's talk about it. And maybe if we start addressing it and being open about some things, maybe, the culture of that can change, because I think it's a normal tendency in organizations, and it's something we can address.
Put the icing on the cake there. So what you were reading was the unhealthy commandment number 4 at page 41, but at the top of page 43, just a couple of pages over, it says, learning to become an emotionally healthy leader takes time. The rest of this book is an invitation to go on a journey into becoming an emotionally healthy leader, a leader who can build an emotionally healthy ministry for the sake of Christ in the world. So
And
be easy on ourselves. Just be easy on ourselves. And this is not a quick fix. It's not an overnight thing. Nothing is that's worth of any value.
Thanks for closing with that. I think that's a great way, because that's the goal. We just want to, journey this together. And it's not to beat ourselves up or be harder on ourselves, but we all want to be better.